Hello, H&H Nation. Can you believe we're back yet again for another week of the show? And I can't believe that we've had so much over the last week to talk about. Honestly, I mean, obviously it's basketball season, so it would make sense. But the Rockies making moves too. And I mean, they're kind of relatively routine moves, but at the same time, new front office, not necessarily sure what's going on. That's always exciting for us to see when transactions get made at this point in November. So, I mean, we might as well get right on into it. But before we do, I'm going to remind you that we do have that Q&A session at the end of this show. I won't get to questions or comments throughout the show, but at that point in the show, we will talk about all of them. So if you have any questions or thoughts about anything that I'm talking about on this episode, or just in general about Nuggets, Rockies, whatever it might be, put those in the chat and I'll read those comments at that point in time. But ups, downs, exciting moves. I mean, there are a few different ways that this title could apply to both the Nuggets and the Rockies this week, but we're going to start with the Nuggets because that's what we do on this show. Interesting week for the Nuggets. I mean, you look down at the schedule and you're going to see 3-1. Solid week. Unfortunately, the win streak was snapped at 7. Mighty unfortunate, but a 3-1 week, man. They're still right up there with the Oklahoma City Thunder as the top 2 seeds in the Western Conference. And so that's really what you want out of this week. It was a tougher week. You played a tough Timberwolves team, you played a tough Bulls team, and you played a tough Rockets team. But they weathered it. They got out of it with 3 wins, even though the win streak died. So let's talk about these games because there's quite a bit to talk about in each of these games. Each of these games was very unique in its own sense. And watching each of them, except for the Pelicans game on Wednesday, I had a lot of different thoughts. So let's just get right on into it, man. Let's start with the Timberwolves game because the Timberwolves obviously have given the Nuggets tons of trouble over the last 2-3 seasons since knocking us out of the Western Conference semifinals the year after we won the championship. They've just always been a team that has size. And that size, even though we've been a generally big team too, has caused us issues. Ant-Man has caused us issues. Mike Conley, even though he's one of the smallest guys in that rotation, has caused us issues. And so over the last few seasons, we've kind of looked down at the schedule, seen Timberwolves games and thought to ourselves, that's probably going to be a close game, but it's probably going to be a loss. Okay. And for whatever reason, this season, the Nuggets have decided that that's no longer the case. So they've now beaten the Timberwolves twice. They beat them obviously last Saturday. They beat them earlier on in the year. That one I'm not counting as much because Anthony Edwards didn't play this last Saturday. Anthony Edwards did play, so it's a little bit more of a fair evaluation. They were full strength. The Nuggets were not at full strength. No Christian Brown, no Cam Johnson. And so for those reasons, I was very concerned. I even said that on last week's episode. I was like, I could easily see how the win streaks get snapped tonight. And the Nuggets took that personally, apparently. They went into Minnesota again, understaffed, if you will. And they won. They won the game. What was the final score of this game? It was an 11-point win, 123-112. And I mean, the way this team just continues to demonstrate that they're a championship caliber team this season is just really quite incredible. I mean, you're down 2 key starters and you go into a team that, or into an environment against a team that you've struggled against significantly over the last few seasons and you win. I mean, it's just kind of awe-striking. You know, it just was completely unexpected from my perspective. Obviously, in that game, like I said, the 2 injuries. So Tim Hardaway Jr. did get bumped into the starting lineup. Peyton Watson also got bumped into the starting lineup. I kind of like that he's actually been starting in place of Christian Brown, even though he's kind of been used more as a small forward than a 2 guard. But he actually has a similar playing style to Christian Brown, comparably. Neither of them are amazing shooters. Both are plus defenders, relatively speaking. And so it's a good fit. But again, even with that starting lineup, and a bench that's kind of having its depth tested as a result of having those two guys in the starting lineup, Nuggets weathered that just fine. Started off a little bit slow in that first half. A lot of the games this last week had weird runs. I mean, every single game this week, it felt like was a game of runs for the Nuggets. Either they would go on like a 10, 12 to 2 run, and then the team that they're playing against comes back with like the same type of thing. And so it's kind of been weird. This Timberwolves game was no different, but that's kind of what happened in the first half of that game. Nuggets went into halftime down, and then they showed up second half. Just a group effort all around. You had four guys in double digits, not only double digits, but in the 20-point range, 4 20-point scorers in that game. It was absolutely incredible. Tim Hardaway Jr. did a phenomenal job stepping in to that lineup as the starting 2 guard on that evening. Dropped 23 points, 5 threes. And so that was a very encouraging win because they never really let the Timberwolves get going. They never really let them get hot outside of a few of those runs in the first half. And for that reason, they were really able to just keep within reach and not let these games get out of hand like they've had a tendency of getting out of hand before. And so that was a very encouraging win for me. That Timberwolves game on Saturday evening kept the streak alive, 7 games in a row at that point. And it was really a good team effort, even though the bench kind of struggled. Like I said, the stars showed up, Joker showed up, Jamal showed up, and the other guys who got thrown in to that starting lineup contributed well. Okay, so that was the Timberwolves game. That was a good win. 7 wins in a row at that point. And then they had a day off Sunday, came back home against a Chicago Bulls team that was young, a Chicago Bulls team that is top 3 in the league in 3-point shooting percentage. And they struggled. On the broadcast, they noted that just historically speaking, the first game home after like a week-long road trip is usually the toughest game. Now, you would have still looked down at your schedule and seen the Bulls coming to town and thought to yourself, well, this is probably a win for the Denver Nuggets. If you factored in the fact that that Sunday evening before the Nuggets game, the Bulls went to Utah and lost a double overtime game to the Utah Jazz, you might have been even more encouraged about the likelihood of the Nuggets winning this game. But unfortunately, that just wasn't the case. So, and I think that a lot of Nuggets fans are going to be, or were probably a little bit more frustrated about that win, or that loss rather, than they probably should have been, because they were probably looking at all that context and thinking, this doesn't make sense. How do you lose to the Chicago Bulls team? They're tired, coming off of a back-to-back. You're back home. It doesn't make much sense. But if you think about it this way, it's a little bit more interesting, right? So they were in Utah the night before that Sunday evening. The Chicago Bulls were. Doesn't matter that they played a double overtime game. All right. They're one of the youngest teams in the league. I think they're like the 12th youngest team in the league. Nuggets are the 5th oldest team in the league, which is kind of strange to think about because they've always kind of been that team that you're kind of thinking about as having a potential long-term sustained success. But we're kind of right in the prime of a lot of our key contributors' careers now. And so we're actually the 5th oldest team in the league. Double overtime games for younger teams don't hit as hard. Simple enough. And if you think about the fact that they were also in Utah, very similar altitude to Denver, only within about 1,000 feet difference, Salt Lake City and Denver. So if you think about it this way, the Bulls came into Denver as the younger team, as the team that was more acclimated to the altitude than the Denver Nuggets were, having spent a week away from altitude because of that road trip. And so that's really what it felt like. It felt like the Nuggets were tired in that game, and it felt like the Bulls decided to just be that young team that was just going to run the Nuggets out of the gym. That's usually what the Nuggets do, right? But that's what they decided to do. They just decided to run, push the pace, hit tons of threes. They hit an insane amount of threes in that first half, dude. I mean, these are guys that have been in the league for a decent period of time, mixed in with a few younger guys. But I mean, when I'm seeing Javon Carter just nail threes just from any position on the court, at that point, you're just kind of like, okay, this is going to be a tough night. This is going to be a tough night, man. And so that's exactly what it was. Nuggets really did struggle in that first half. They looked tired. They looked lethargic. And then second half, they kind of got close. They actually had the lead. They had a 3-point lead in the third quarter of that game. We're not able to hold on, Bulls made some big shots down the stretch when they needed to. They gave the Nuggets a chance to just close them out. They gave the Nuggets a chance to overcome the strugglesome first half that they had in that fourth quarter and come back and win that game. At the end of the day, Bulls just made shots that they needed to, made threes when they needed to, and the Nuggets just didn't have the energy. And so I kind of think that was a weird dynamic of that Bulls game. Final score of that game was 130 to 127. So it was a 3-point game. Really close, really competitive at the end. But I mean, you give up, 19 threes to a team in a game, probably not too good. But I kind of thought it was interesting that might have been one of the reasons why the Bulls had this sort of unexpected confidence coming into Denver on the second night of a back-to-back where they just played a double overtime game. They're probably just thinking to themselves, hey, we are more adjusted to the altitude than these guys are. We're significantly younger than these guys are. We're going to run them out of the gym. We're just going to nail or shoot as many threes as we can. We're one of the best teams in the league at doing so to start this season. And that's pretty much what happened on Monday evening. So yeah, really no bench contribution for the Nuggets in that game either. And so that was kind of a game where we were like, that's painful because the win streak dies. That's a team that you probably beat under most other circumstances, or maybe not actually, right? Because the Nuggets have now lost 3 straight games to the Chicago Bulls going back to last season. So maybe the Bulls are becoming the new Timberwolves in some sense. Not obviously the same rivalry dynamic, but nonetheless, they're a tough team, man. Tough team. And that was a tough loss on Monday evening. Then they finally had an easier game. They went back out on the road on Wednesday evening, played against the Pelicans. Solid win. I mean, the final score was 125 to 118. So it looks like it was a lot closer than it really was. Derek Queen for the New Orleans Pelicans, first round pick. A few people might have thought that he was taken a little bit higher than he probably should have been, but dude balled out, man. I think he had 30 points in this game. Yeah, he had 30 points. And that's in going head to head with Nikola Jokic on a lot of those possessions. So solid performance for the kid there, but the Nuggets held on and they did their job. And that's really all they needed to do in that game. They had no Aaron Gordon in this game, no Christian Brown in this game. So it was kind of strange that Zeke Naji got a spot start, but that really just speaks to the confidence that they had in this game, right? Naji was told before the game that if Zion Williamson made a return from injury and started in this game, then he was going to get bumped in. And that's exactly what happened. So if you were wondering why Naji started that game, that's why. But he also started that game because it's the Pelicans, and you might as well just give your guys and your depth some reps in those types of games when there's really not a lot of stress that you have to worry about. So that was a solid win for the team. Joker had a triple-double as per usual. But Peyton Watson balled out in that game. 32 points. I don't think I would have had a 30-point PWAT game on my Denver Nuggets bingo card for 2026. But apparently it happened. And he was just money, man. Made 5 threes, was 5 of 9 from 3. Played solid defense. Just absolutely incredible game for him. And I think that's actually a good sign for this team over the next few weeks as they continue to not struggle, but try to find ways to win regularly without Christian Brown. Not that it's really a struggle for them because they're a good team. Obviously, they've demonstrated that, but it's good to see that Peyton Watson can step into that Christian Brown role better than I thought he could. I think he has really worked on his shot this season. They said that he did earlier in the year. He spent a lot of the summer working on his jump shot. But I think if you give him more of those opportunities to hit those corner threes on kickouts and such, he's going to nail a lot more than you think he will. And he's going to get those shots open a lot more than, well, a lot of other guys in that lineup. So you might as well use this period of time to build Peyton Watson into that productive contributor that he apparently can be. So phenomenal game for him. I get that it's the New Orleans Pelicans. Again, it's not like he dropped 30 against a playoff contender, but at the end of the day, he hasn't dropped 30 against anyone thus far in his career. And so to see him have that career high was incredible. Ben showed up again. You got 12 from Bruce Brown. You got 14 from Jonas Valanciunas. So again, that team effort, that's really what the core of this team is. It's just getting double-digit performances from 5 to 6 to 7 sometimes guys on a nightly basis, which is why I've said earlier this year, like I said, I think on the podcast last week too, I said on the reel that 5280 Media posted to their socials this week, this is the year the Nuggets win the championship. And that's exactly the reason why. Everyone knows their role. Their chemistry is solid. Even when they're hurt, they seem to know how to win basketball games. And that just continues to show in a variety of different circumstances against a variety of different teams. Not least of which, the Houston Rockets. And so now I want to get to the last game of the week, the game that was played last night. That was an absolutely amazing game. That was an entertaining game pretty much from start to finish. And it again speaks to this point. Last night, you had Aaron Gordon in the starting lineup. He leaves 3 minutes into the game with an injury. I think it was probably related to that hamstring injury that he had injury management for on Wednesday against the Pelicans. But regardless of that, the team won again. They figured out a way to go into Houston. Good team, younger team, very athletic team, solid defensive team, and they won that game again, shorthanded. Man, this team, man, they just go and they win in a variety of different circumstances. And last night's game was another great example of that. So they started off the game pretty well. Right. They were up by like 10 to 13 points in the first quarter, and they'd only held the Rockets to like 11 points. And so at this point, we might have been thinking, okay, we're coming to play tonight, and this might actually be like a 10 to 15 point win, massive statement win against a team that we're competing with for seeding in the Western Conference and in the Cup as well, the NBA Cup. For whatever reason, however, Reed Shepherd decided he wasn't having any of that. And he had 17, 20 points in the first half off the bench. Absolutely incredible. So that was quite unexpected. Good for him, though, in all honesty, because he was drafted 3rd overall last year, spent a lot of time in the G League, didn't really perform very well when he had the opportunity to play for the Rockets last year. But this season, he's making the most of his opportunities. And man, can that guy shoot. So he really single-handedly got them back into that game in the end of the first quarter. Throughout the second quarter, literally had like half of the team's points when they brought the deficit back to 2. Competitive game going into halftime. Houston scored 37 points in that second quarter. And made it really close at halftime. So again, it's this theme though that you're seeing with the Nuggets all too often. Not necessarily sure if it's an issue yet, but you definitely don't want to see it. These massive runs, man. And it's not just like they're small little 5-7 point runs here. They're double digit runs. Like the starters will get a lead that's 10 to 13 points, and the bench will come in and that lead will just disappear during the first phase of the bench unit. That seems to be a problem. Nuggets are one of the worst second quarter teams in the entire league thus far in the year. But I mean, they offset it with a solid third quarter, and then they offset it with a good enough fourth quarter to hold their lead, which is exactly what they did again last night. So Nuggets won the third quarter last night, scored 34 points, and then they scored 32 points again in the fourth to hold it down. Again, shorthanded, not having Aaron Gordon, even though they expected to in that game. Spencer Jones, man, ended up being the difference in that game, not just because of his defense, but quite literally because of the one shot he made. Funny enough, Nuggets won by 3, and he hit 1-3. That was his only shot that he took in this game, and he made it. Funny enough. But how about him, man? It's kind of incredible that he was just a guy we found on the street last offseason. If there's one thing you could kind of thank the previous front office for over the last few years, it might actually be Spencer Jones. Spencer Jones might be that one guy that accidentally turned into someone who becomes a key contributor for this team down the stretch. Now, I think they do have a roster decision they'll have to make at some point, because if you keep getting production defensively that you like out of Spencer Jones, you might even consider giving him some more offensive reps to see if he can become a guy who can be a solid 3-and-D player for this team. But if you like Spencer Jones's contribution to this team, you're going to have to make a decision, because he's on a 2-way contract. He can only play about 50 or so games, I think, this year before needing to be added to the roster so he can play the rest of the season. Interesting decision that the Nuggets will have there. Not sure if they have an open roster spot at this point. They had one earlier in the year, but I'm not sure if they filled it. So if anyone deserves a roster spot, though, it's Spencer Jones, because this is the type of guy who you would love to throw in a playoff series for some 10 minutes a game to just go out there and give you hard-nosed defense on the other team's best or second best score, right? You could throw him out there with Christian Brown, 2, 3. They both kind of play a little bit of both of those. Spencer more so plays the 3 and Christian Brown plays the 2. But that's a solid defensive lineup that you could throw out in the postseason. And so it might be worth adding Spencer to the lineup. He's absolutely ferocious on defense and demonstrated that last night against a Houston Rockets team that has some pretty good scores. Kevin Durant didn't necessarily have the greatest game of his life last night. Şengün, something similar. Jabari Smith showed up when they needed him to. And that was also unexpected. But nonetheless, solid offensive scores, and he really helps take a lot of those opportunities away with his defense. So big shout out Spencer Jones, man. That guy looks like an absolute find from the depths of no one really knows where. I think he went to Stanford and was undrafted. So absolutely amazing. Joker obviously continued to be amazing last night. 34 points, double poster. That was the highlight of the night, man. That, not that it was a significant momentum changer, but it was just cool to see Joker get up and poster people, because that happens like once a millennia. So that was fun. That was pretty much the Nuggets week, though. 3-1, like you said. The ups were obvious. Obviously, solid wins this week, even though the team hadn't been healthy. The downs are obviously the team not being healthy, and so how much that impacts their ability to really build consistency with the bench unit, so that period of time when the bench unit comes in for their first phase of the game can be more stabilized. We'll see how much that chemistry gets developed over the course of this year if those injuries continue to persist with AG and Christian Brown, maybe even with Cam Johnson here and there. By the way, Cam also deserves a shout out. I should note that. Solid game against the Bulls on Monday evening when we absolutely needed it. Like I said, everyone was tired, but he had the best game he's had this season that night. He's had a pretty solid week. He kind of cooled off against the Rockets last night, but it seems like coming back from the game or two that he took off because of that arm injury, it seems like he's found his timing a little bit better. He's figured out his timing again. When he gets to close to the apex off of his jump, that seems to be when his shot goes in the most. And he just didn't really have that timing the first few weeks of the year. So if he can continue to build consistency with that shot again, and you can get 10, 15 points out of him at some point on a nightly basis, this Nuggets team becomes really quite untouchable. They already have a top 5 offense in the league. And so if you can continue to get that kind of contribution out of Cam Johnson on a more consistent basis, the Nuggets are in a really good position to succeed here throughout the rest of the season, but especially during this period of time where they're battling some significant injuries. But we're going to shift gears and we're going to start talking about some Rockies baseball, man, because there were a few interesting moves made this week, and I'm not quite sure how Rockies fans feel about one of them. Okay, so for those of you who might have missed it, the 40-man roster pretty much got sealed up this week. And that was important for a few reasons. Number one, we had a few of our top prospects who needed to be added to the 40-man roster to prevent them from potentially being taken in the Rule 5 draft upcoming in December. You don't want to lose a few of those guys. And so we added 3 of them to our 40-man roster. That's Sterling Thompson, that was Gabriel Hughes, and that was Wellington Herrera. So 3 guys who I think were on my list, actually, that I shared last week of prospects who are knocking on the doorstep of being contributors in some way to the 2026 Colorado Rockies. So it's good to see those 3 guys added to the 40-man roster this week. But at the same time, moves were made to remove some guys from the 40-man roster and ultimately to remove them from the organization. And so those 2 guys were Ryan Rollison and Michael Toglia. It feels like only a few days ago, but it really wasn't. It feels like in relatively recent history, we were talking about Michael Toglia as the potential future first baseman of this team. Even back in 2023, 2024, when he and Eloise Montero were battling for first base playing time, we kind of thought that Tolia might have the skill set that makes him the first baseman of the future, since Montero didn't seem to be able to put it together consistently offensively or defensively. And so we were really excited about Tolia. Got his opportunity in 2024 and absolutely ran with it, right? 25 home runs in only about 450 plate appearances. So that was quite incredible. We had lots of reason for optimism with Tolia. All he needed to do was cut down on the strikeouts. And unfortunately, he just couldn't do that. That's really going to be the thing that sealed his fate. The fact that in 2025, he struck out nearly 40% of the time. That's just not going to cut it. It's not going to cut it for a team that plays at Coors Field, that needs to put the ball in play. It's just not going to happen. And while he's generally been viewed as a plus defender, and he was a pretty good defender in 2023, 2024, he got a little bit worse defensively. And in 2025, he continued down that pathway of being a worse defender than he seems to be earlier on in his career. So he wasn't even necessarily as good of a defender as we all thought he was. And so for that reason, you could understand the fact that he was removed from the 40-man roster and that he was not tendered a contract and is officially a free agent. Unfortunate for him. I actually saw him play at the Futures game in Colorado. What was that, 2021? Yeah, in 2021, he was the Colorado Rockies representative. The year that the All-Star game and All-Star weekend was here, I went to the Futures game, and he hit a home run in that game. And I was like, that guy, I can't wait for that guy to become an everyday contributor to this team. Just didn't pan out. Couldn't figure out the strikeouts. And that is really what sunk his career here in the Colorado Rockies organization. Ryan Rollison is a lot easier of a move to explain because he just hasn't been good. He wasn't good in the few outings that he had in 2025. And he's also very much on the older side. For a guy who made his debut last season at age 28, to not really show flashes of a guy who could become a key contributor to a successful Rockies team in the next 3 or 4 years, you can completely understand why that move was made. He also didn't really have a pitch mix that fit well at Coors Field. High spin rate curveball, high spin rate slider. Didn't throw his changeup very much. It was his least used pitch, and his four-seam fastball was a little bit spinnier than you might have liked. Above average spin rate on his four-seam. And so all his pitches at batting averages against of over 300. So easy move there for the new Rockies front office to remove Ryan Rollison from the 40-man. I think he ended up being traded to the Atlanta Braves for cash, which is, I guess, not a bad move if you're the Colorado Rockies trying to pick up some financial resources, given that you're relatively starved for them. But yeah, those were the two moves made to remove guys from the team. I'm happy with both of them for the reasons I just explained. Tolia strikes out too much, and we have some pretty good depth at first base right now in the organization. And then Rollison just wasn't good. A little bit of a late bloomer because of those injuries. Not really a guy you could see being a contributor in a consistent role for this team going forward. So I was happy to see those two moves made. I wasn't expecting either of those two moves to be made, but it cleared up some space on the 40-man. And with some of that space, the Rockies went out and they made a trade. The Colorado Rockies made a trade for pitching, veteran pitching. And if you'll think back to last week's episode, when I was going through my 2026 Colorado Rockies roster rebuild, one of the things I did say we need was a lefty short reliever. We also need a lefty long reliever. And so I would have been happy with either one. But for whatever reason, the Boston Red Sox are selling off some of these veteran pieces and clearing up space, probably to go out and make some significant moves in free agency for themselves. They were a playoff team last year, and they really just need to patch a few holes before they feel like they can compete in the AL East with the Blue Jays and the New York Yankees. So maybe that's understandable. But they gave us Brennan Bernardino for Braden Ward. Okay, this is an absolutely amazing trade. And I'm not necessarily sure how Rockies fans feel about this move. Okay, I'm not going to lie. I was very optimistic. But as you can probably tell, the first 2 weeks of this show, I tend to tilt more on the optimistic side more than I don't. And so Brennan Bernardino, left-handed Jimmy Herget. That's the perfect way to think about Brennan Bernardino. He's in his mid 30s. I think he's 34. So he's not a guy who's going to be on this team for the longest period of time, but it's a phenomenal addition. I mean, 2025, 4-3 with a 3.14 ERA. Again, not a big strikeout guy, but he's a good ground ball guy. He limits hard contact. And those are two things you like to see out of a relatively good budget deal for the Colorado Rockies. And so Brendan Bernardino, I was absolutely amazed at that move. It was a great move. It was an under the radar move, but it's a move that fills a need for the Colorado Rockies. A left-handed short reliever is now going to be in that bullpen, which is a must. Luis Peralta was kind of that guy in 2025. We had high hopes for Luis Peralta in 2025. He did not meet them. And so maybe this is a good opportunity for Luis to develop more in Albuquerque with a fresh slate and really build his skill set into a skill set that can contribute to this team at some point in 2026, but more so 2027, 2028, 2029. Right. If we're, again, thinking about the Colorado Rockies decisions through that lens of 4 or 5 year development as they build back in towards competitiveness. But Bernardino's great, man. A sinker, curve, and changeup. Those are his top 3 pitches. He also throws a cutter and a slider, but love the pitch mix. Low spin rate, sinker, low spin rate, changeup. The curveball is a higher spin rate curveball, which doesn't necessarily play very well at Coors Field, but it's a lot like Jimmy Herget's curveball. It's not really an over-the-top curveball, more 11-5, 12-6. It's more of that sweepy, slurvy curveball that Herget has. And for that reason, it really does play a lot more like a slurve than a curve, right? More like a sweeper even. And so based on the spin type that he's getting with that pitch, it might actually not be as impacted by altitude as one might think by just looking at the fact that it's a curveball. And so for that reason, I think Bernardino could have not necessarily Jimmy Herget level success. I don't think any of us expected Jimmy Herget to have a 3.15 ERA at Coors Field during the course of an entire season. But he can definitely be a guy who succeeds more than people think he might and be a solid left-handed reliever in the Colorado Rockies bullpen. And he was hard for lefties to face in 2025. So a lot of optimism for this move. This is really going to have to be the way that the Colorado Rockies build their roster now. Now that the 40-man roster is full, they can't sign free agents unless they want to remove others from the 40-man roster. But if we take a look at this 40-man roster, there really aren't very many guys you could see being removed. Okay, Garrett Acton. Okay, I'm fine with Garrett Acton being removed. I can't believe he was actually signed to this team in general. So I'd be fine if that happens. But this is the 40-man. Garrett Acton, Zach Agnos, Brendan Bernardino, Bradley Blaylock, McCade Brown, Angel Cheville, Jeff Criswell, Chase Dolander, Ryan Feltner, Kyle Freeland, Tanner Gordon, Seth Halverson, Jimmy Herget, Wellington Herrera, Jaden Hill, Gabriel Hughes, Juan Mejia, Anthony Molina, Carson Palmquist, Luis Peralta, Antonio Senzatella, Victor Vodnik. Okay, so that's the pitching staff. Can't really see many more than 2 of those guys potentially being removed from the 40-man for any given reason. I think those 2, like I said last week, would be Acton and Molina, but we'll see. Catchers, Braxton Fulford, Hunter Goodman, Drew Romo. That might actually very well be the Rockies catching core in 2026. I don't really know between Fulford and Romo who has the better trade value. I know that Fulford has more experience at the big league level than Romo does, but I know Romo was the higher touted prospect than Braxton Fulford was, even though he was hurt for most of last year. And so if you wanted to really go out and get that veteran catcher, James McCann, the guy I recommended the Rockies go out and get in free agency, was signed at some point this week by the D-backs again. So he's off the market. If you wanted to go pick up your veteran catcher still, you might have to ship one of those 2 guys away. Do you really have an issue sending Braxton Fulford or Drew Romo away at this point in their careers? I don't necessarily know. But that's kind of the 40-man catching core for now. And I think I'd be fine with that being the 2026 catching core. But I could understand if maybe one of those guys was moved to make improvements either to the catching core by adding a veteran or adding somewhere else. This is what the infielders on the 40-man roster look like. Adael Amador, our guy, he needs to really step it up in 2026, man. He was highly touted. He's got a good skill set. He's a solid defender. He just needs to be more consistent at the plate. And so if he can do that, second base is a spot where there will be competition in 2026. Hopefully he can take that next step and really step in there. So Adael Amador, Warming Bernabel, Blaine Krim, Kyle Karros, Ryan Ritter, Ezekiel Tovar, Jordan Beck, Brenton Doyle, Yanquiel Fernandez, Tyler Freeman, Troy Johnston, Mickey Moniak, Sterling Thompson, Zach Veen, and then our good buddy Chris Bryant. So you really can't imagine very many of those guys being removed from the 40-man. And so for that reason, the Rockies are going to have to add to this team using trades mostly. Which is unfortunate because we spent a lot of time last week building a team based on free agents. But if that's the way that the DePodesta administration, if you will, if that's the way that they want to build this team, I don't really have an issue with it. I think that might actually be the better way to build the team because you can now go out and see how much value your guys truly have in-house, and you can go add under the radar moves or players through under the radar moves like this one. I mean, we sent out Braden Ward for Brennan Bernardino. Ward is just another one of those guys who was stuck in the outfield backlog. He hit 290 in Albuquerque last year. So solid hitter. He stole like 50 something bases as well. So this is a guy with a skill set, but we have so many outfielders in this organization right now that it just made sense to clear up some of that depth and get someone like a Bernardino who can contribute immediately and fill a hole that we directly have right now. So I was very happy about those moves. And I think there's a reason for optimism. Not just because you brought in a lefty like Bernardino, not just because you released rather unproductive players in Tolia and Rollison, but because it shows that the front office is willing to make relatively tough moves. Okay. If you were to ignore a lot of the context surrounding Tolia and Rollison, for instance, you're just looking at two guys who were first round picks in recent years. I think Tolia was our first round pick in 2018 or 2019, one of those 2 years. And then Rollison was our first round pick in 2020. Those are two first round picks. High investments were made in both of those guys. And the new front office is saying, we don't really care about that. We don't really think either of these guys can be long-term contributors to this team based on the playing time that they've received in recent years. And so for that reason, we don't really care about the sentimental value that might have been held onto. We don't really care about the investment that might have been made there. We're moving in a new direction, even if it means parting with a guy in Tolia who had a rather exciting outlook just a season ago. So it's good to see that the front office is willing to make those tough kind of moves, or moves that might be perceived as tough by a Colorado Rockies fan base that is used to this whole draft and develop system, getting excited about prospects, even though in recent years they really haven't panned out. It's good to see that the front office is moving in the direction that they feel is best and not really taking those prior investments and that weight into consideration and just making moves that are good for the organization in today's Colorado Rockies day and age. So that's number one reason for optimism. But the other reason for optimism is that the moves being made actually add value. I had some conversations in comment sections with people about this Bernardino move. A few of them were like, this is not a good move for the Colorado Rockies. His stuff doesn't play at Coors Field. And I was responding to them saying, well, guess what? No one's stuff really plays well at Coors Field. So that's not actually the question. The question is, what type of skill set, what type of pitch repertoire works best and can give this team good enough pitching at some point in time to the point where they can build enough success there to be competitive. Okay. People don't come to Colorado to pitch. So you have to make moves for guys who will be the least impacted by your ballpark environment as possible. And that's exactly what the Bernardino move is. A sinker ball pitcher, a guy who gets the ball on the ground, a 3-pitch pitcher, by the way. And that might be a little bit more important than a lot of people realize, I know he throws more than 3 pitches, but he throws 4 pitches actually, more than 10% of the time. So he uses a decent amount of them a lot of the time. It's important to have at least 3 pitches. And I was listening to a short made by Trevor May earlier this week. He was kind of walking through some of his notes from the postseason in 2025. And he noted that relievers that struggle in the postseason are the relievers that are 2-pitch guys. The 2-pitch guys do not succeed because the more innings they throw against the same team in a set series with just those 2 pitches, the more hittable they become. And that apparently held weight in the 2025 postseason. You think about a guy like Gabe Spire on the Mariners. It didn't matter if he was put in against the lefty later on in the series against the Tigers or against the Blue Jays. His stuff just got picked up a lot more than people might have thought because he was a pretty solid reliever this season. But that said, you want to see the Rockies making moves that indicate that they're building not just a team for this year, but that they're looking at things for the long term. Going and getting a guy like Bernardino who has those 4 pitches shows that the organization is not only looking for guys that fit at Coors Field, but looking for guys that are actually people who have a fit that can achieve long-term success and postseason success when the team gets there at that point in the future. Now, I'm not sure if those were all considerations that were made by the front office, but it's interesting to note that that is a reality of a move like this. You ship out depth, that you have an overly valued amount of. You ship out an outfielder who's not on your 40-man roster, and then you bring in a guy who has a solid 3-4 pitch mix, who has low spin rate stuff, who has a slurvy, sweepy curveball that can play well at Coors Field, better than a lot of other pitches. And there's a lot to like about some of the potential considerations that this front office might have made when making a move like that. And so I'm very intrigued to see how this philosophy continues carrying throughout this offseason as they continue to make more moves. The winter meetings are coming up. And so if there was ever a time to make some significant trades, that would probably be the season that I'm looking forward to most as a Rockies fan right now, seeing that they're not currently going to be able to add to this roster through free agency since their 40-man roster is full. So yeah, guys, that's really all I had for today's episode. Ups, downs, exciting moves, man. Both on the Nuggets front and on the Rockies front, there is a lot going on. There's a lot for us as Rockies and Nuggets fans to be holding on to and be closely fascinated with over these next few weeks as the Rockies move into their offseason and as the Nuggets move further into their stretch without a fully healthy team. And so there's a lot that we'll be keeping tabs on here on 5280 Media and specifically on Hoops and Homers. So I'm super excited to track those moves with you guys and to see how these seasons and this offseason continues to pan out for both of these teams. This is the Q&A segment. Now, I don't see any comments in the comments section. Thank you to anyone who's watched so far on this episode. If you have any questions about anything I've said right now, I'll wait on for another 30 seconds to a minute to see if anything shows up in this comment section. But again, it was a good episode. I enjoyed this week in Colorado Rockies sports. Needless to say, you probably picked that up from watching this episode. It was a good week for the Nuggets, 3-in-1 week. It was a good week for the Rockies, making some tough moves, but productive moves that really actually netted in a benefit for the 2026 team. So super excited about this week in Colorado Rockies and Denver Nuggets history. And it doesn't look like there are any comments here that I'm seeing. So we're going to wrap up the show a little bit early today, about 45 minutes in. So thank you again to everyone who listened. We will see you next week this time. I think the 11 a.m. start time is the start time that we're going to be doing going forward for these streams. So we'll see you next week at 11 a.m. Till then, continue to follow the social media of 5280 on Instagram, on Twitter, on YouTube. And until next week, I will see you guys then. Have a fantastic week. Peace to you.